If you enjoy Ship Chat, then consider becoming a channel member. If you join at the Commander tier, you'll be able to request topics for future videos. So if you want something to be discussed in a video, then joining at the Commander level is an excellent way to do so, and it helps out the channel. Thank you very much. Right, today we're going to be looking at the Norway class. It's quite an interesting class and quite unusual in many respects. For one, they call it Norway, but the ships rarely get given proper names for the class. They're always named the USS Minneapolis or USS Budapest, neither of which are in Norway. But in any case, apart from, American-centric naming conventions, and clearly they don't know European geography, it was designed by Alex Yeager for the First Contact battle sequence. The CG model was then made by ILM, so it appeared in First Contact. It's not particularly visible compared to things like the Akira and Sabre, which are very much at the forefront of that battle sequence. But it is there and it can be seen in a few shots, but I suspect was probably always intended to be in the background. Now, it was going to be carried over into Deep Space Nine for the various Dominion War battles. We see all the rest there, including the Steamrunner and the Sabre, which if you look at the CG models, the Akira is the best, and then the Sabre and the Steamrunner particularly, I don't know, they don't look great, but they're enough to pass muster, and certainly they look perfectly good in the sequence. But when you take a closer look at them, the original models, they don't stand up particularly well. But this was the 90s, so fair enough. Unfortunately, the Norway wasn't there. It was notably absent, and this is apparently because the CG files, we don't know specifically what happened, but it's suspected that the CG files were corrupted. And so it kind of disappears in terms of portrayals and representations for quite a while, and somewhat fades into obscurity, especially compared to its contemporaries, the Akira and Sabre, which, all become quick fan favourites. And now in that time, people did, alternatively, create their own models of the Norway, which you can find all over the internet. And in 2015, Star Trek: The Official Starships Collection created a new CG model, which was based on the original design notes and the Deep Space Nine technical manual. Now, I think I've made my thoughts abundantly clear on the DS9 technical manual. Is that it isn't necessarily particularly consistent with canon, and it does have some differences with other various models. So, in some ways it's perhaps, if you want a Norway, you can kind of take your pick. But I think, it's perfectly reasonable that all these different portrayals of the Norway exist as different sub-variants. That's its real behind-the-scenes story. It's quite an unusual one. And maybe we'll see it in Lower Decks. It's certainly the right time period, and it would be nice to see it, getting some long-deserved screen time. In any case, in universe, it was developed as part of the Anti-Borg initiative, and it was really there as a light frigate. Specifically, it was going to be operating alongside the Akira in this big swarm formation, and you had different layers of the swarm. You had the Steamrunners and Defiance that were going to be up close and personal with a cube, really kind of just inflicting attritional damage, drawing a lot of attention. You then have the middle layer, which would be Sovereign and Sabres, and then you'd have the outer layer of the swarm, which would be the Akiras and the Norways, and they'll be pummeling the cube from range with powerful weapons. In the case of the Akira, that's of course torpedoes, and in the case of the Norway, it is a lance phaser, which can be seen on the bow. That's why it has this unusual deflector setup, is it's including provisions for the lance phaser. Now you might say, well, surely that conflicts with the navigational deflector, but of course the navigational deflector is only used at warp, and you can't use your lance phaser at warp anyway. It works perfectly well, and that's why it's modified in such a way. You also have, now in terms of secondary armament, this is where we come into a bit of inconsistency between different sources. It's described as having like 4 to 6 phasers, but that seems far too many for such a simple hull design. I'm imagining there would only really be 2 phaser strips on either side of the main hull, and then maybe one big ventral one, because there's nothing in the way down there, and then maybe 2 pairs on the nacelle pylons. It also lists 2 torpedo launchers, which, looking at the official Starships collection, doesn't seem to be present. Now, we do see it on other models, the one used in the Squadrons fan film, which if you haven't checked out, what are you doing? Go check it out. Awesome. I mean, another thing that fan film brings in is the idea of different liveries painted on the hull. So each of the Norways, there's 4 Norways, and they all have a different colour on the hull, which I think is excellent, a great way of differentiating them, and I think definitely makes sense in universe. I think it's why they've done it in Lower Decks, or that's certainly one of the great ideas that's been used in Lower Decks as well. Tactical capability, it is obviously protected with shields and ablative armour. Now, it's perhaps not as well armoured as something like the Defiant or the Steamrunner, but is reasonably resilient. The main thing is that it's got a slim profile. From the front and side, it's a very small target. For a ship of its size, it is, basically just a flat iron. So it's very difficult to actually hit it, particularly if it is moving at long range. And it is really there to be a hit and run ship. It isn't there to slug it out at close range. It's there to take its shot with the lance phaser and then get back. Now, that is really where you come into a bit of an issue. I'm covering this as part of the monitors. It's the first on this series that is purpose-built, but it's also the one that least relies on its lance phaser. Yes, it will use the lance phaser on stationary structures, possibly long-range targets, and large targets like Borg cubes, but aside from that, it will mostly rely on it in ship-to-ship combat. It's mostly going to be relying on the secondary weapons, its torpedoes and its phasers, which are pretty potent. And that does make it a lot more versatile than the other monitors. Now, in terms of its career, it was used in the Dominion War. You generally see it used amongst the more elite formations, where it could be better supported. It would be outnumbered really by the Freedom. Now, it did see an increase in production as the war went on. It outclassed its Cardassian adversaries very easily. And it was very good for the offensive stages of the war. Yes, you have this lance phaser, but you also have other weapons that you can rely on in a pinch, which means you can be a bit more aggressive with the Norway compared to the other monitors. It can actually go forward, take care of itself, can protect itself in a pinch and still have that lance phaser capacity. And that really is what helps the Federation maintain that momentum when they enter the offensive stages of the war. And then post-war, it continues to see service. It's an excellent patrol ship, and somewhat elegant in many respects. Although it is still, in terms of design, it is quite unusual, and certainly it's not to everyone's taste, but I think it has a certain charm to it. It's just a shame that they keep assigning it the wrong names.